Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some serious psychology today. We're tackling Influence by Robert Cialdini.
This book is like the Bible of persuasion. Cialdini really breaks down the how and why we're influenced to say yes, even when we don't realize it.
I've heard it's full of fascinating stories and examples, like he went undercover, right, to learn these tactics firsthand.
He did. He spent years studying compliance professionals, salespeople, advertisers, you name it. He wanted to understand how they get us to comply with their request.
So he was like a persuasion spy, infiltrating their ranks. That's dedication to research. But don't worry, we're not going to turn you into master manipulators.
Right, the goal here is awareness, to shine a light on these tactics so you can recognize and understand them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, as they say. So where do we even begin? Persuasion seems like this big, mysterious force.
Well, Cialdini argues that a lot of it boils down to mental shortcuts. Those little time savers our brains rely on to navigate the world without getting bogged down in decision-making.
We're all about efficiency, right? Especially these days when we're bombarded with information 24/7.
Exactly. These shortcuts are usually helpful, but they can also make us vulnerable to influence without even realizing it.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me an example. How does this shortcut thing work in the real world?
Cialdini loves using animal behavior to illustrate this. Take mother turkeys, for example. They have this instinctive reaction to the cheep, cheep sound of their chicks.
Makes sense. Mama turkey hears her babies, and she's all about protection.
Right, it's a powerful evolutionary shortcut that ensures the survival of their young. But here's the fascinating part. Researchers found that even if you play that same cheep, cheep sound from a stuffed polecat—
Wait a minute, a polecat. Those are like the enemy, right?
Exactly, a predator. But the mother turkey, relying on that cheep, cheep shortcut, will still respond maternally. She might even try to cuddle it.
Oh no, poor tricked out turkey. But, okay, I see what you're getting at. These shortcuts, while efficient, can backfire.
Precisely. And we humans, while a bit more sophisticated than turkeys, have our own versions of cheep cheep that make us susceptible to influence.
So this deep dive is all about identifying those human cheap cheeps, those triggers that make us more likely to say yes without thinking it through.
You got it. And what's fascinating is that these triggers aren't always some sleazy sales tactic. They're often deeply rooted in social norms and psychological principles.
Like that sense of obligation we feel to return favors, right? That's Cialdini's first principle of influence, reciprocation. So reciprocation, it's like that age-old saying, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Exactly. It's more than just a saying, though, isn't it? It's like this unwritten social rule that we're all kind of bound by.
Yeah, it's how we build trust and maintain relationships. But I can see how the sense of obligation could be used to influence us.
Oh, absolutely. Think about those free gifts you get in the mail sometimes, with a donation request letters.
Ugh, those. I always feel obligated to donate, even if it's not a cause I'm super passionate about.
There you go.
Yeah.
It triggers that sense of indebtedness. Even if you didn't ask for the gift, you feel compelled to give something back.
And it's not always about material things, right? Like even small gestures can create that feeling of obligation.
Precisely. Cialdini talks about this really interesting experiment where a researcher sent out Christmas cards to a bunch of complete strangers.
Christmas cards to people they didn't even know. What was the point of that?
You'd be surprised. A pretty high percentage of those strangers actually sent cards back. They felt obligated to reciprocate the gesture, even though it came out of the blue.
Wow, that's amazing. It shows you how deeply ingrained this rule of reciprocation really is. We're wired to want to repay kindness, even from strangers. But how does this play out in, say, a business setting, like a negotiation, for example?
That's a great question. It's actually a classic tactic, Cialdini calls it rejection then retreat. Let's say a salesperson starts with a ridiculously high price, something they know you're going to reject outright.
Okay, I've been there. Trying to buy a used car, maybe. It's almost insulting.
Right. But then here's the thing. They come back with a lower price. Still maybe not a great deal, but it seems so much more reasonable compared to that initial outlandish offer.
So you're more likely to say yes because it feels like they're making a concession, like they're doing you a favor.
Exactly. They've created that sense of obligation. Like, hey, we moved closer to your price. Now you need to move closer to ours. It's subtle, but it's powerful.
I never thought of it that way. It makes you wonder if you should always start a negotiation with a crazy high or low offer just to leverage this principle. Although I'm not sure I have the guts to try that.
It can be a risky move, for sure. But just being aware of it can help you navigate these situations more effectively. You'll recognize when someone might be using it on you.
Right. It's about being informed, not about being manipulative. Okay, so we've tackled reciprocation. What's next? This sense of obligation is definitely powerful. But Cialdini doesn't stop there, does he?
Not even close.
Yeah.
He has 5 more principles of influence to unpack. And next up is one that I think a lot of people can relate to: commitment and consistency. We all like to think of ourselves as consistent people, right? Like, we have our principles, we stick to our word.
I like to think so most of the time. But how does that desire for consistency make us vulnerable to influence?
Well, Cialdini argues that once we've made a commitment, especially a public one, we're much more likely to act in ways that align with that commitment, even if it's not really in our best interest anymore.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like when you tell everyone you're going to run a marathon, even though you secretly hate running.
Exactly. You've made this public declaration, so now you're stuck with it. And Cialdini actually uses this great example of toy companies leveraging this principle to manipulate parents.
Oh, tell me more about that one. I'm always fascinated by how marketing plays into all of this. Okay, toy companies and mind games. I'm all ears.
So picture this. It's the holiday season, and there's this hot new toy that every kid wants. Cialdini says toy companies will actually deliberately undersupply stores before Christmas.
Creating this frenzy, this artificial scarcity. I've seen those lines.
Exactly. So parents, desperate to please their kids, they promise this toy they can't even find.
And the kids, they don't forget. You promised, you promised.
Right. Then, after Christmas, what happens? The company ramps up advertising for the toy again, and now it's readily available.
And parents, feeling bound by that promise, they go out and buy it even though the hype has died down. They've been played.
In a nutshell, yes. It's commitment and consistency at work. But it gets even wilder. Cialdini talks about how this principle was used in a much darker way during the Korean War.
Oh, no, this should be good. What happened?
Well, the Chinese POW camps, they used this tactic on American soldiers.
Seriously? To what? Brainwash them? Make them betray their country? How is that even possible?
It's chilling, really. It wasn't about torture or threats. It was much more subtle. They'd start small, getting soldiers to agree to these seemingly insignificant statements.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, they might ask them to copy down something with a slightly anti-American slant, or to agree to a statement that's like just a little bit critical of American policies.
Okay, so not a huge deal on the surface, but that's how it starts, right?
Exactly. These small acts, over time, they build a sense of consistency. So when they're later asked to do something bigger, more compromising, it's not as much of a leap.
Because they've already agreed to all these smaller things, they feel compelled to stay consistent, even if it means betraying their values. That's heavy stuff.
It is. And it highlights how important it is to be aware of those small commitments we make, because they can end up shaping our behavior in ways we might not anticipate.
So commitment and consistency, it's not always about manipulation. It can also be a powerful force for good, right? Like setting goals, making promises to ourselves.
Absolutely. It's all about harnessing that desire for consistency in a way that aligns with our values, our goals.
Okay, I'm ready for the next principle. What else did Cialdini uncover in his years of persuasion research?
Well, have you ever noticed how you're more likely to do something if you see other people doing it, especially if those people are similar to you?
Oh, 100%. It's like that feeling of, well, everyone else is doing it, so it must be okay. Like when you're traveling in a foreign country and you have no idea what to order at a restaurant.
Exactly. You look around to see what everyone else is having, or maybe you check the online reviews to see what's popular. That's Cialdini's third principle of influence at work: social proof.
It's like we outsource our decision-making to the crowd. Safety in numbers, right? But I'm guessing it's not always so harmless.
Unfortunately, no. Cialdini talks about this tragic case, the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. It's a really disturbing example of how social proof can have devastating consequences.
Oh, yeah, I vaguely remember that case. It was all over the news. What happened again?
So Kitty Genovese, she was attacked and murdered, and there were like 38 witnesses who either saw or heard the attack happening.
38 people. And no one did anything. How is that even possible?
Well, it's believed that a big part of it was the bystander effect, which is this phenomenon where individuals are less likely to intervene in an emergency situation when other people are present.
Because they assume someone else will take care of it.
Precisely. They look to others for cues on how to behave, and if no one else is reacting, they assume it's not actually an emergency. It's a chilling example of how social proof can lead to inaction, even when someone's life is on the line.
That's heartbreaking, but I get it. You don't want to overreact if no one else is. But still, 38 people.
It's a powerful example, and it just goes to show how deeply ingrained this tendency to conform really is and how it can play out in ways we might not expect. But social proof isn't always about life or death situations. It can also be really subtle. Like Cialdini talks about this study where researchers planted wallets around a city.
Okay, planted wallets. This sounds intriguing.
So all the wallets had the same amount of money in them, but some of them also contained a letter. And this letter, it was written as if the person who found the wallet was a really helpful person, like they were doing a good deed by returning it.
Okay, so they're adding this element of like moral character to the mix. And what happened? Were people more likely to return the wallets with the letter?
They were. It's fascinating, right?
Mhm.
It suggests that even just being exposed to the idea of someone else being helpful can make us more likely to be helpful ourselves.
So we're not just mimicking actions, we're mimicking attitudes and values too. It's like we're constantly absorbing cues from our environment about how to behave.
Exactly. And marketers, they know all about this.
Yeah.
Think about those testimonials you see in advertising, the ones with average people raving about a product.
Oh, yeah, the "it changed my life" testimonials. I always wonder if those are real.
They might be, but the point is they're effective because they tap into this principle of social proof. By showing regular people enjoying a product, advertisers are implying, hey, if they like it, you will too.
Join the club, even if it is a club of paid actors. Okay, that's social proof. Looking to others for guidance, whether it's choosing a restaurant or deciding whether or not to intervene in an emergency.
Exactly. It's all around us. But Cialdini doesn't stop there. He has more principles up his sleeve, and this next one delves into our deep-seated respect for authority.
Authority, right. We're taught from a young age to respect authority figures. Parents, teachers, police officers. It's part of what keeps society functioning.
It is. But Cialdini argues that this deference to authority can be manipulated. We're often so quick to obey authority figures that we don't stop to question their legitimacy.
Meaning we might follow the orders of someone who has the appearance of authority, even if they don't actually have any real power or expertise.
Exactly. Think about it. We associate certain things with authority. Titles like doctor or professor, uniforms, even luxury cars. These things become mental shortcuts. We see them and we automatically assume expertise or credibility.
It's like, oh, they must know what they're talking about. They have a fancy title.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But this blind trust can be dangerous. Cialdini talks about this shocking study where nurses were asked to administer a dangerous dose of medication to a patient.
Wait, what? They would never. That's their job, to care for patients.
I know, it sounds crazy, right?
Oh.
But here's the thing. The request came from someone who identified themselves as a doctor over the phone.
So they were blindly following orders, even though it went against their training, against their better judgment.
Exactly. It's a really disturbing example of how easily we can be swayed by someone we perceive as an authority figure, even when they're asking us to do something that's clearly wrong.
It's a good reminder to question authority, right? Don't just blindly follow orders, even if they come from someone with a fancy title.
Absolutely. It's about informed respect, not blind obedience.
Mm.
And I think that's a good note to wrap up on today.
Wow, we covered a lot today. Reciprocation, commitment, social proof, and authority. Who knew there was so much psychology behind the simple act of persuasion?
It's fascinating, isn't it? And these are just 4 of Cialdini's 6 principles of influence. There's a whole world of persuasion tactics out there, just waiting to be explored.
It's like Cialdini peeled back the curtain on the wizard, showed us how the tricks are done.
Exactly. And now that we know how the game is played, we can be more conscious, more discerning participants.
So, the next time you feel that urge to say yes, take a moment to ask yourself, is it because you genuinely want to? Or is it because one of Cialdini's principles is subtly at work?
That's the million-dollar question.
Big thanks to our expert for breaking down these fascinating principles with us today. And to our listeners, keep those minds open and those persuasion detectors on high alert. Until next time, happy influencing, everybody.